Go through in your mind real quick and see if you can come up with one, and then I might call on you. That's the fun part.
You want to come up with one activity for each?
One activity that you might have done at each level.
Okay. You want one?
I was giving everyone a chance to think first.
It's called wait time.
Mm-hmm. What's the actual green? 5 minutes. All right, I'm skipping remember. If you haven't done a remember activity, just pick up your stuff and you can take a walk. Who has one for, let's shoot for apply. Anyone for apply? Go for it.
When I went over the principles of voice that an actor uses to perform pitch, rate, volume, the students had to perform a radio activity where they could only act using their voices, and they had to show changes in volume and changes in pitch and rate to create characters.
Me? Anybody else? Good.
When we're doing Newton's laws of motion, you put different scenarios up on the board and have them go through and apply, which one goes where and why. Why do you think that it's either 1, 2, or 3?
Well, so tell me how they're going to apply it.
Well, they have to understand what the rule is about.
Mhm.
There's acceleration or inertia.
All right, for those of you who have been a while on Newton's laws of motion, let's go with every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
So you might do rockets,
Rockets.
spacecraft. And how does it apply? What's going on? So they have to understand what the rule is and then be able to tell you, okay, this is why this is happening like this.
Gotcha. Cool. Anybody else? How about one for create? Anyone for create? Something you've done creation-wise. Is that a confident hand, Ms. Canzano? Go for it.
Well, we just created, I don't know if you're doing science right now, your class had to create science projects, like a presentation.
Okay.
So like my class created puppet shows to present whether or not it was better for their specific species to live in a group or to live alone.
Okay, cool. How were the shows?
Good.
Yeah? What did they make the puppets out of?
Science Expo this weekend.
Some made them out of socks, some of them made it out of felt, and they actually just put a thing to make
So they actually had to go through the whole process of creating. Okay, cool. Anybody else for create? Is there an echo?
Yeah.
I feel it.
We had to make, similarly in science lab, we had to make an insect or animal eye in science lab. And they used guava slushy lids and saran wrap, aluminum foil, bubble wrap to recreate the eye.
Okay, so the reason I'm starting off with this is we're trying to make a shift in the way that we're teaching. But traditionally, a lot of things that you might have gone through as your own education when on course probably fell much more towards these two things. Assessment-wise, we still often go a lot more on these things. They're a lot easier to do. If you can remember something and give it back to me on a test, is that easy for me to be able to judge?
For judging?
2 plus 2. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm feeling
Well, I'm just
confident.
thinking about math. Yeah, no, I was just thinking about,
No cheating.
with the math program that we're using now, like the Envisions,
Right.
everything that they do, they have to explain. So it doesn't, sometimes they should be using a certain strategy that we talked about.
Yes.
However, for example, we just gave a Unit 2 test, and Margaret and I are piloting the Envisions for 3rd grade. And one of the questions made it very clear that the children should be solving it using a bar diagram.
Okay.
However, throughout the unit and the unit before, there were other ways to solve that. So we said, you do not have to solve it using bar diagram, just show how you solve it and explain your thinking. So I kind of feel like, especially with math, even though yes, we're still testing them on the math facts, when with this math program, and a lot of them actually now, they actually have to show their work and explain their thinking with whatever strategy they're choosing to use. So I feel like we're actually, in the math department, it's very, in science obviously,
Right.
we're moving up. And, but with other areas, it might not be as easy, but like social studies, maybe they can show it with a project or some sort of a skit, but.
So I think it's an interesting concept, and if you can use this as a litmus test in your own mind, it's helpful. You're fairly confident you know how to add?
Yeah,
Yeah, you wanna put it to a test?
sure.
Ready? 3,842 plus 6,472.
I forgot the number.
Ready?
It's around
3,462
Mhm.
plus 6,754. Giving you numbers.
I'm,
A big number.
yeah, a big number.
A big number.
Okay, I probably don't know how to add really fast. Am I-
All right, so here's the deal.
I need the paper.
Are we actually challenging them to do what we want to prove that they can do? If I gave that to you on a piece of paper, how many of you in here could do that? No problem. Now, when I give it to you audibly, it's a lot harder to do, right? And if I gave you the real world, if I handed that to you, you'd probably pull out your phone and use a calculator. Well, no, Dan, you're saying you'd like to do it on paper, but that's fine. You could be a Luddite, do it.
I know I had to borrow.
The reality is that if that's the only test we give, and that's what we're valuing, that they're able to just reproduce exactly the things that we give, we want to make sure that they can apply the concepts, and that's kind of where we're trending here. All right, so this is something you can't use probably because it's way too small on this screen. So what I'll do is I'll just share this. But it talks a little bit about the areas and then how you can use different activities that go with it. So for instance, under application, you can construct something, solve something, you can report about something. So we talked about that already. Reporting out on how you would use, how you would, no, don't help me because I got this. The animal, if you had an animal and they were living in a group, why they live in a group or why they live independent, yes? Or your eyes, why they have specific features for their eyes. If you are in the desert and you have sandstorms coming around, you might want to alter the way that your eyes are working over time. Well, you don't necessarily alter it, but we don't need to get into that. Here's what we're going to do, a quick activity. It's very simple. You can work alone or with a partner. It doesn't matter to me, however you feel more comfortable. I will come around real quick and give you, well, Miss Barry's going to give you paper, and I will measure out tape and give it to you. It is, the activity couldn't be clearer. Your interpretation, if you look at it differently, is fine.
Freestanding. What?
One sheet,
Freestanding.
using only one sheet. Welcome.
It's probably like this. Okay, right? No, but it's like freestanding, so that's why it's probably like that, like
You
this.
can work with a partner, would be better, or you can work on your own.
So we can't take down.
the biggest.
You guys want to make one? Is that right?
Give me all but one.
If it doesn't say.
We only need one piece of paper and one piece of tape.
It's right there.
Can we put it in there? Well, we can turn it the other way. We have tape.
How many groups you got?
Oh, wait, we can. What if you made those little things and taped them together? Or like
Take gum?
So we're done,
we're done,
we're done. What do we do now? Can we do anything here? Wait, where's the, we don't have tape. We have tape. We have tape. So one this way, and then we'll put it up.
Yeah, it has to be enough.
Oh, wait, you don't know what to do.
We need a scissors. Wait,
How many groups are there?
and then this is hard.
It's hard stuff.
What's that?
I don't have nails.
Does that make sense?
I don't have nails.
I have scissors.
I won't pick my nails.
No.
What are we doing?
But then, oh yeah,
Yeah, because it's scissors.
on the bottom.
This is why we work so well together. Why we're good together. We'll keep making it small.
Well, we only have 12 inches, so we can rip it to. So
Okay.
one, but even if you take like this little one and roll this one, and stand, you know what I mean? Like one,
What if
you?
Well, here, wait, let's see if we can stack it.
We can always tape
You can take that.
What if you roll it though, like a
We'll roll where? Tape it like
this, like this. So the little piece is like this, but it'll stand in a circle. You know what I mean? Put that and then put it on top like this. You know what I mean? Like keeps that. Yeah, keeps that, but it will stand. I don't want to rip it until it's stand, you know?
We're not too careful.
I'm sitting with you.
Really tall.
I put a timer up. When that's done, we're done.
Whoa, what? It has to be even that many.
What if you did it, what if we made these into more, and you made these into, what if you did tall, the tallest you could do? So if we.
Oh wait, you wanna keep this one?
Yeah, what if we made,
I love it.
you know what I mean? Like if I rip this in half again, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll stand.
I'm getting
Well, it has to, I feel like this, if we stack these, that would be.
That's a good idea, though, that elastic sign like that. How long can it keep it going?
You'll find yourself in the middle of class trying to think of a speech and walk out.
I know.
Oh, look at how good.
That still works.
Yeah, they're gonna be tall.
No, I mean, that one's okay.
It's like,
How's it gonna stand?
I wondered when I saw the thing.
Just throw the tape on top of it. You know, like on the top, sometimes it's like longer.
Do you want me to measure it for you?
I'm not sure what the tape is.
It's like a flag.
I don't know what you want me to do with the tape, Brittany, I'm not sure how it's gonna add.
You let me know when you're ready.
We're like, we're prime.
That's like four, if you mix it fancy.
I
See, they do.
it's all three.
Oh, well,
Oh, that one's gets taped to the tape.
The redesign process.
Oh, we can
You gotta
take
find some more yourself something?
You know what, I want this.
So then you just kind of.
Page or nail?
Where's the tape?
Oh, yeah, Oh, my God.
We need one with like a wide property and a wide, like a bottom.
You're not gonna be able to do
Oh
it.
wait, can we take this?
You can.
Yes.
What is the start of it?
You have 15 more
That was not the
seconds.
design.
What's that?
That was not the design.
I told you about 3 minutes ago that I was up there.
Looks like Betty Sue Who. Never. Anybody need extra tape?
No share.
I think the tape.
Time. All right, hands down.
Alright, so get
I'll just hold it up.
Yeah.
They got theirs to stand.
I got the tallest one stands about right here. It's team, all right, shut up.
Whoops.
So team Lala, and for those of you who are not aware, Lala obviously stands for Language Arts, was the winner of the design challenge. There stood as tall as this piece of tape. Now, some of you were well on your way.
No tape.
No. And some of you decided to throw away one of your resources as an option in order to change it. Your resource for tape and paper. He decided he was going to go tape because he wanted to personally challenge himself. Now, I really don't care about the height. The discussion I don't want to have based off of this had nothing to do with engineering because we don't have all engineers inside of this classroom or all people even teaching science. So the discussion is, where can you find value in the tower activity? What are this is something that you could do inside of your classroom, but how would it be valuable inside of your classroom? So what are some of the things you had to do?
Two things right off the bat, teamwork and also planning. Because as we were doing, we kind of just went right into it. And I think it's a good lesson for kids to learn that if you just stop and kind of plan for a second, you might come up with an even better idea than rather than just jumping into it.
Right, I purposely collapsed your timeline because I only have so long to talk to you. Plus, I'm sure you want to leave. Karen made me promise we'd be gone by 5:30, so we will do it. Now, there's a joke, I'm kidding. It's 5. Actually, you love how everyone looked at me. No, we'll be done by 5. But that's an excellent point. Anybody else?
I think creativity is really good to encourage. In a lot of core classes or even other classes, creativity maybe isn't the easiest thing to hit on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to get your kids to start being creative, especially in language arts, Lala. Now, if you were doing this in language arts, the equivalency for you might be, well, come up with a story. How many times in your own class have you had a kid say, I don't know what to write about, can you just tell me what to write about? We have a huge issue with creativity in our classes, and it really doesn't matter what you're teaching, whether you're teaching drama. There are certain kids who might walk in and be very creative, but then you tell them that here's this play you need to work through. Be the character. Now, I don't know what the character is. What would the character do here? Well, part of acting would be thinking about what does a character do, having some perspective. Or if you're teaching math, and you need to creatively solve problems, or there are more than one ways to solve a problem. For instance, Boccaccio.
Yes.
5,624 plus 3,252 is?
Almost 9,000.
All right, so a lot of ways to handle that, right? He decided he was going to round the 5 or round the 3 up, and he went with almost 9,000. So there's a lot of different ways you can handle that. If I'm a math teacher and I give that problem out, we look at different ways, and then I can ask you, what was your technique? Now I know your technique was to just say, well, I'm going to cut this at its threshold and cut that at its threshold. I'll combine them and give you an approximation answer, right?
Yep.
Somebody else might have said, say that again, let me write it down, and then I can give you the answer. And somebody else might say, hold on a second, let me get my phone out so I can get a calculator, and then I'll put it in there, and then I'll give you the answer, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you can solve almost any problem that you're dealing with. The problem that we have as education, and I'm not talking personally, as a whole, is a lot of the time we have a preconceived notion of why something should be done in one way, and we pass it on to the kids. And on top of that, what is your biggest resource every single day that you're nervous about losing? Motivation could be one, but somebody else said it. No. that could be a good one. But it shouldn't be the biggest resource you're nervous about. Somebody else said it over here, I think. Time. Time. You have a ton, I hope this doesn't break. You have a ton of things to get through. You have a ton of things that you need to get through. However, you only have so much time to get through it. You start looking at all the chapters. Let's say math is an excellent example of this. I need to get through 9 chapters with these kids. If I don't get through 9 chapters with these kids, I'm going to send them to the next grade level and they're not going to know what to do. I can see why that would be an issue. However, how many times have you gotten through a chapter with a kid and only to go back and use that same information 4 chapters later and they say, never learned how to do this. We need to get a balance on where is that threshold for usefulness in time. If we rush through something just so we can put a check in that box, we also lose the opportunity to engage students in the actual concept. So if we focus on content instead of on concept, we end up paying the same toll several times. And you get that whole situation where the next year's teacher says, they were only teaching this in insert grade before. Kindergarten, you get to talk about the preschool, and preschool, you get to complain about the parents. So if they had only taught this beforehand, I would be having this problem now, but we need to reteach it because somebody's not doing their job, and I'm not pointing fingers, but. So a reality is, if we are going to actually assess them, we need to be assessing them that they can understand the concepts and actually work with the concepts, because it becomes frustrating. And now, we have the privilege of having a behaviorist here who could tell you what happens when a student becomes frustrated and feels as though they can't accomplish something. Would you like to share?
That's where we see most of our behaviors, when the student doesn't, understand what's going on or have a full grasp of what's going on. They show that in other ways, sometimes the behavior is a form of communication.
You can almost bet on the fact that a kid will rather look bad than stupid. And if you're just measuring the idea that they can remember the content and give it back to you, and that's your only measure, they don't get to apply it, they don't get to do any of these other ways that they might use to cope with it. If they feel like they can't do the material, rather than look like they're stupid in front of peers. And I use the word stupid on purpose because it sounds really bad, right? You would never call a kid stupid. I hope you wouldn't. Again, if you would call a kid stupid, this is another opportunity to pick up your stuff and find it. But we wouldn't call a kid stupid, but when a kid feels or perceives that they're stupid, that's when they start saying, well, I'll find other ways to get myself acknowledged and to seem cool to my peers. And sometimes in the younger grades, being cool means you get called out on things or you get all this attention from the teacher. So that's one of the things that I think we have to work on. Now, how could you use an activity like this? It doesn't have to be this activity tomorrow. So instead of me talking the entire time, take like 2 minutes and just talk to the people at your table and see if there's an activity that you can think of in your genre. Also, Norris, remind me when we're done with this 2 minutes because I want to go to you. I have a question.
Okay.
Just let that break.
All right.
I'm just trying.
Like if you're doing something like that.
But I did. Well, some kind of activity together.
It's actually, I was just saying, they did that great. Yeah, good for them. We did that in the house. When I was she made like, is that they had a
That's very, very small.
right, but I'm talking. When they're doing it, yeah, like, like rowdy and they don't like so I think there's math, like math. You have it also. So I've been like partnering
So whatever, like, so
so
instead
when
of
we're doing
array,
the
let's say
independent practice, if I have
they
so
had
many kids that
to
go
make
together,
some, make different arrays with the same.
so the kids like they have
Yeah, that is a good one too. That is
so they all had a volunteer and like
that is
that's fun.
I was in a school last year and they made their own, so they had puppet shows. So they had something, they did puppet shows and they acted it out.
Yeah, I'm trying to picture my head. What do you mean by that?
All right. So, before we get into, because I want to hear a bunch of your ideas, but before we do that, I said I would go back to Norris because I wanted to ask you a question. So, Kevin, you teach history, in case anybody else didn't know. I knew he knew. So, Kevin, you teach history, yes?
Yes.
Probably one of the easiest subjects to pick on as far as, as far as Bloom's taxonomy. Where would you assume most of history takes place?
The two bottom lines.
Yeah, understanding and remembering. So, tell us about what you're teaching right now, just as for frame of reference.
Tomorrow we start learning about the Constitutional Convention.
A good time. If you weren't at that convention, or you who haven't read about it, you're missing a good time. We just got through the Articles of Confederation. now we're gonna knock out this constitutional convention, there's going to be wild revelry, and we're going to just really discuss the roots of our nation, right? How does this apply to me as far as what I'm going to do with this, besides for being able to tell you that during the Constitutional Convention, blah, 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 and then, so can I do anything with that?
As far as like the other levels?
Yeah.
Okay, so, for example, tomorrow we're putting the kids, we're starting a week-long simulation where we are literally pretending that we're like the delegates that were there. And we're putting them into groups with like other delegates from their same state. And tomorrow they have to start writing their own speeches to give to the class, like on like what positions they would have backed. So they are like working together to like create something, and I guess apply it to. So you can use create application.
Okay, can somebody think of another way to add on to that? To what Kevin's doing? Anybody?
You said they're reenacting. They're acting, they're reenacting.
They're assuming a role.
And then next back, couldn't you like push it forward to how they could like connect to today? Into today's society?
Yeah.
Check that out.
Where is there somewhere in the world right now that is in disarray and trying to build a government?
Like everywhere else.
Yeah. Where do you want to go? You want to go to Egypt? You want to go to Iraq? Right, so these kids are surrounded by a world that is in this exact same state, just happens to be hundreds of years later. So how do we take this and no longer make it about just the specific concept of this is how our nation was built, but this is why our nation is so successful. The democratizing certain areas when you don't have a strong foundation isn't very successful, is it? We saw that in a lot of Middle Eastern countries where we just walk in and we say, here's democracy. You guys are gonna love it. Well, if you don't have a foundation for why you love it, and you don't have the reasoning behind it and understand the concepts, it's useless, right? So what we're building for them is really not, can you memorize every single one of the pieces of the Articles of Confederation? Can you then go into the Constitution and tell me what each one of the amendments were? We want them to understand why these things were done, how discussions take place, how we make changes, why one thing can't last forever and one thing needs to be adjusted, right?
I was going to say, last week we did a simulation on the articles that was like totally rigged. You actually might know because Talia was in there. Where they couldn't agree on anything, like nothing got done. Like the kids were like freaking out and like getting so angry. Like now this week they'll see like things go smoother. So it was like a poor simulation, and this week's going to be like a good simulation where things work better.
So you're kind of puppeting them.
Yeah, in like a sick but educational way.
You claim education. I would definitely give the sick portion. All right, so I think it's educational. How will this help you tomorrow? So what are some of the things that you were discussing at your own groups for how you could possibly apply a technique like this inside of your own classroom? Go for it.
I would say like if I was to teach measurement, like kind of for my next unit.
Right.
So if I give them like a challenge to build a house and I only gave them the requirements of like a perimeter that they could have that they need to build it in. So they would have to figure out different ways to build a perimeter of a house based on the dimensions I give them.
Right, so the lesson is about measurement, but inherently in order to achieve their goal, they need to be able to measure.
Right, they need to know, like they need to apply and like create the house based on what they know about perimeter.
So you're almost forcing them to want to learn how to measure so that they don't mess up and they can succeed. It's a good idea. Anybody else?
I was saying timing's extremely important. It might be more beneficial to spend more time on the scaffoldings. That way your timing makes more sense later. So you don't end up with extra or not enough time to do the projects you're doing.
Right. Let me ask you a question. Does the end project always have to be perfect in order for your job to be done? I think that some people get caught up on that, and that's kind of tough. Sometimes you can't see me over there. Sorry, sometimes you get caught up in the whole, well, we got to get this done. I want to be able to take a picture. It's not about the picture at the end. It's about what they can explain and where they